Baby girl saw a German shepherd stranded on a cliff edge. What happened next left everyone crying. The sound was barely there, a soft cry, hidden beneath concrete and chaos. What followed was a journey so unbelievable, even those who witnessed it struggled to explain it. This is the kind of story that hurts your heart and then heals it. If you've ever doubted kindness, stay with us. This one's for you. Like, share, and subscribe for more. The sun was setting gently behind the hills, pouring golden light over the quiet countryside. Fields stretched wide and open, the air heavy with the smell of grass and the soft hum of crickets. It was the kind of evening that made the world seem calm, wrapped in peace. A little girl, no older than 4 or 5, walked hand in hand with her grandmother along the narrow path that curved behind their farmhouse. Her tiny shoes tapped against the stones, and she swung her arm lightly, humming a tune only children knew. The grandmother smiled down at her, her wrinkled face softened by the glow of twilight. These evening walks had become their ritual, a way to ease the long days and let the child burn off her restless energy before bedtime. The girl's eyes darted everywhere, to the birds returning to their nests, to the fireflies beginning to blink in the shadows, to the wide valley stretching out below them. Then all at once she stopped. Her hand tightened around her grandmother's fingers. "Nana," she whispered, her voice uncertain but sharp, "did you hear that?" The older woman paused, listening. The valley was quiet except for the sigh of the wind moving through the trees. "It's just the wind, darling," she said, patting the child's hand. "Come on, let's keep walking." But the girl didn't move. Her small brow furrowed, her ears straining. And then she heard it again, faint, broken, not like the sound of wind or bird. It was thinner, raw. It sounded like a cry. "Nana," she insisted, her voice trembling now, "someone's up there." Her grandmother frowned, her gaze following the child's pointing finger toward the ridge ahead. The cliffs rose steep and jagged, painted in the last strokes of daylight. For a moment, she saw nothing, just rock and shadow. But the girl tugged at her hand, pulling her forward. Together they walked closer, the path narrowing as it wound toward the edge. The child's little heart beat faster, a sense of urgency carrying her feet quicker than her grandmother's. As they reached the cliff, the grandmother felt her breath catch. At first it seemed the child's fears had been only imagination. But then, a movement in the shadow, the faintest flicker of life clinging to the rock face. There, wedged on a narrow ledge high above, was a German shepherd. His body shook with exhaustion, claws scraping desperately against the stone. His fur was dirty, his ribs sharp under his coat, and one paw dangled helplessly over the drop. The dog's chest heaved with shallow breaths as though every ounce of strength was slipping away. The grandmother pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh, dear Lord," she whispered, the weight of the scene pressing against her chest. But the little girl stepped closer to the edge, her eyes wide, shining with something beyond fear. The shepherd's eyes met hers across the distance, and in that silent exchange, the trembling dog gave the faintest thump of his tail against the rock. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Her grandmother reached for her arm quickly, pulling her back a step from the cliff. "It's dangerous, sweetheart. Stay back." But the girl shook her head fiercely, her voice soft but certain, carrying through the quiet air. "We can't leave him," she whispered, her tiny hand pressed to her chest as if she could feel the dog's heartbeat inside her own. "He's waiting for me." The cliffside loomed higher than it had moments before, now that the truth of what clung to its ledge had been revealed. Jagged stones jutted out like broken teeth, and the slope beneath seemed eager to crumble at the slightest touch. The German shepherd's claws scraped desperately against the rock, sending small pebbles tumbling into the valley below. Each scrape made the grandmother's heart jolt, her breath quickening with fear that the next moment might be the last for the helpless animal. She held the child back with one hand, her eyes scanning the ledge. "Oh, heavens," she muttered under her breath, her voice unsteady. "He'll fall, he's going to fall." But even as she said it, she could feel the little girl tugging at her skirt, pointing insistently at the struggling creature. Without thinking, the grandmother fumbled for the small phone in her pocket. Her hands trembled as she pressed numbers, calling neighbors, calling anyone who might know what to do. Her words rushed out in short, panicked bursts. "A dog. Stranded on the cliff. Please hurry." Minutes stretched like hours, the setting sun slipping further behind the hills, the shadows growing deeper and colder. Soon, the crunch of hurried footsteps came along the dirt road. Neighbors arrived one by one, their faces pale with worry as they too looked up at the ledge. A farmer in muddy boots whistled low, shaking his head. "I've seen plenty of strays, but never one stuck up there. Poor thing won't last the night." Another neighbor, a woman with a lantern, pressed her hand to her chest. "Cliff's too steep. Rope won't hold against that rock. It's suicide to climb." A hush fell over the crowd. Every eye stayed fixed on the trembling dog. His chest rose and fell sharply, each breath shallow and weak. Every now and then, he tried to adjust his position, but the stones beneath his paws were loose, tumbling away with terrifying speed into the valley. The sound of each falling rock made the onlookers flinch. But through all the fear and uncertainty, a small voice rose, soft but steady. The little girl stepped forward, her tiny shoes crunching against the gravel. She cupped her hands around her mouth, her words carrying through the twilight air. "It's okay. Don't be scared. I see you." The dog's ears twitched. For a moment, the shepherd lifted his head, and though his body shook with exhaustion, his tail gave the faintest thump against the stone. It was weak, almost unnoticeable, but the girl saw it. Her heart lit up as if the whole world had spoken to her alone. She turned quickly toward her grandmother, her eyes wide. "Nana, he heard me. He knows I'm here." The adults exchanged uneasy glances. One man muttered, "Even if he hears you, it doesn't change anything. The ledge won't hold long. We've got to think this through." But the girl was not thinking about the danger. Her small voice rose again, softer this time, almost like a lullaby. "Hold on, boy. Please hold on. You're not alone." The shepherd pressed his body tighter against the ledge as if clinging to her words more than the rocks beneath him. The grandmother's heart ached. She turned to the gathering crowd. "We need a plan. A rope, a ladder, something." But the hesitation in the air was heavy. A younger man shook his head. "The slope's too dangerous. One wrong step and whoever climbs goes down with him." Another woman added, "We can't risk a life for a stray. It's just a dog." The words stung the air like cold rain. The little girl spun around, her eyes flashing with something beyond her years. She looked from face to face, her voice trembling but fierce. "He's not just a dog. He's alive. He's scared. He's waiting for us." Silence followed, broken only by the soft rattle of pebbles falling from the ledge. The dog whimpered, the sound cutting through the night like a blade. Every adult shifted uncomfortably, their reason battling against the pull of the child's innocence. The grandmother placed her hand on her granddaughter's shoulder, torn between fear and pride. She saw in the little girl's eyes something pure, a courage untainted by caution or fear of failure. It was the kind of courage adults often forgot as they grew older, replaced by hesitation and doubt. The girl stepped closer to the cliff, her grandmother clutching her tightly to keep her safe. She leaned forward just enough, her small voice drifting once more toward the trembling shepherd. "Don't give up," she whispered. "We'll find a way. I promise." For a brief moment, it felt as though the valley itself held its breath. The dog's tail thumped once again, weak but sure, like a fragile heartbeat answering hers. The crowd, once full of doubt, found themselves shifting, moved by the sight of a child so certain when all of them wavered. Still, no one made a move, torn between their fear of the cliff and the weight of the child's pleading eyes. The grandmother swallowed hard, her voice low but steady as she turned to the group. "We can't just stand here. If a child can see his life is worth saving, surely we can too." The wind swept across the cliff, carrying with it the girl's quiet whisper that no one but the shepherd seemed to truly hear. And in that moment, it was clear to everyone gathered that sometimes it took the smallest voice to awaken the courage the rest of them had forgotten. The neighbors returned in a rush, arms full of ropes, old blankets, and a dented metal hook someone dug out of a shed. Boots scraped the gravel as people spread the coils on the ground, measuring with their hands, guessing at knots, arguing in worried whispers. The ropes looked strong enough, but the cliff looked stronger, alive in a cruel way, ready to drop whatever tried to touch it. Above them, the German shepherd whimpered again, a thin sound that shook every chest. Pebbles skipped and bounced from under his paws, pinging down the slope until they vanished into the scrub below. A man in a plaid shirt tied a bowline with quick fingers and tugged hard. "It'll hold," he said, but his eyes stayed on the ledge with a doubt he couldn't hide. Another neighbor tested a second rope around a thick fence post near the drop. "We can anchor here," she said, voice tight. People nodded. Hands kept moving. But when the question came, "Who's going down?" the circle went quiet, and the wind spoke louder than anyone. No one stepped forward. Not at first. They looked at the rope, then at the cliff, then back at the rope. Each face showed the same fight between wanting to help and wanting to live. Even the brave ones shuffled their feet, buying time from the growing dark. The dog shifted, claws skidding, and a flat piece of shale slid away like a loose plate. The shepherd's body pressed harder into the rock, ribs heaving, eyes wide and shining. The little girl gripped her grandmother's coat. Her small fingers hurt with the force of it. "Don't let him fall," she burst out, the plea tearing free like it had been waiting inside her all her life. The cry cut through the air, cleaner than any order, clearer than any plan. Head after head turned toward her, and the silence changed shape. Somewhere in the crowd a young farmer lifted his chin. He couldn't have been more than 20. Mud rimmed his boots and hay clung to his sleeves. He had the kind of hands that looked like they belonged around fence posts and steering wheels, not cliffs. He swallowed once, then twice. His gaze went from the child to the dog to the rope. "I'll go," he said, and his voice didn't shake. A few people reached for him at once. "Think it through. It's slick. Wait for the fire crew." But he'd already shrugged out of his jacket and was knotting the rope around his waist with steady care. "There isn't time," he said. "He won't last." He checked the knot again, made it cleaner, then held out a palm. "Gloves." Someone passed him an old pair speckled with paint. He pulled them on and flexed his fingers. The grandmother stepped closer. "I'll anchor with you," she told the nearest man, and the two of them braced their legs and gripped the rope behind the farmer. Others fell in along the line, 6, 7 hands, then a dozen, people who moments ago had been afraid now finding that they could at least be strong from where they stood. The wind shifted, colder now, slicing up the rock face. The young farmer scooted to the rim and peered over. The ledge looked even meaner from there, carved thin and slanted wrong. The shepherd turned his head at the motion, eyes meeting his for the barest second. The farmer gave a small nod like he'd just shaken hands. "All right, boy," he said softly. "Stay with me." He swung his legs over the edge. The crowd took a breath as one body, then let it go slow as the rope took his weight. Stone rasped against the fibers. A sound like a long, low groan came out of the cliff itself. "Easy," someone murmured. "Slow." The rope creaked again, the sound traveling through every hand that held it, through every shoulder, into every chest. The farmer eased himself down a foot, then another, finding toe holds with careful patience, feeling each spot before he trusted it. Above, the little girl stepped closer to the rim than her grandmother liked. The older woman steadied her with both hands. The girl cupped her mouth like a tiny bell and sent her voice outward. "You're brave," she told the dog. "You're so brave." The words floated over the drop and reached the ears that needed them. The shepherd's tail moved once, a tired little thump against stone. The farmer kept going, muscles burning now, arms shaking from the effort of holding and lowering at the same time. Dust fell into his eyes and he blinked it away, blinking again when more grit found him. Halfway, a neighbor called down, reading the rope. He didn't look up, he didn't dare. He just let the number steady him. Halfway meant closer than before. Closer meant he had a chance. He found a jut of rock the size of his palm and stopped long enough to breathe. He listened. The rope hummed against the cliff, the wind hissed up from the valley, and beneath it all he heard the quick pant of the dog, a rhythm too fast, the sound of fear trying to outrun time. "I've got you," he said. "Hold tight." He moved again. The ledge was near now, only a few long steps below. He could see the bad angle of it, how it tipped just enough to keep anything from resting easy. One of the shepherd's front paws dangled, the pads scraped raw and pink. The other three did their best to keep him pinned to earth that had no interest in keeping him. The crowd above leaned forward without meaning to. Every breath came shallow. The rope creaked, then creaked again, and a few hands tightened instinctively. "Don't jerk it," the grandmother warned gently, surprising herself with how calm she sounded. "Steady. He needs steady." The last stretch took the longest. The farmer reached with his foot for a hold that wasn't there, found nothing, retreated, tried another. The stone under his heel crumbled and he swung a little, bumping the wall. A ripple of fear ran up the rope and out through the line. "I'm okay," he called up, and the steadiness in his voice settled them. He lowered the final foot and let his boots kiss the slanted shelf. It wasn't enough for comfort, but it was enough to share. He leaned into the rock, bent his knees, and set his center of gravity low the way you do when a bull snorts near a fence. The shepherd turned his head toward him, eyes glazed with stress. Up close, the farmer could see every rib, the crust of dust in the fur, the little shiver that never stopped. "Hey, buddy," he said. His words came out soft as straw. "Good boy. I'm here." He didn't reach right away. He knew better. He just let the dog see him, smell the old glove, learn the shape of a person who meant help. The shepherd's nostrils flared. He blinked, slow and tired, and the tip of his tail tapped the rock again. It was a yes, as clear as any word. Above, the little girl leaned into the wind and sent her voice down like a rope of its own. "You can do it," she whispered. "I promise. I'm right here." She touched her chest with a tiny fist, as if to say, "I am with you." The sound reached the ledge. It settled into the dog's heart. Something in him steadied. The farmer chose his moment. He slid his gloved hand forward, inch by inch, until his fingers brushed the scruff of the shepherd's neck. The dog flinched, just a tremor, and then stilled. "Good boy," the farmer breathed, barely louder than the wind. He slid his other hand under the chest, feeling bones and breath. The ledge sighed as if tired of holding so much fear. A sudden crumble snapped from under the shepherd's back paw. The stone went, and the dog dropped an inch, scrambling, nails skittering. Gasps burst from the cliff top. The rope burned hot in the farmer's palms as he took the dog's weight without thinking. "I've got you," he said louder now. His boots skated. Dust rained. For a terrifying second they were both slipping, both losing. Then the girl's voice cut through the panic, small and sure as sunrise. "Don't be scared," she called. "Listen to me. Breathe with me. She did it herself, one breath in, one breath out, loud enough for the dog to hear. The shepherd froze, then matched her rhythm, awkwardly at first, then cleaner. His body stopped thrashing. His claws found a whisper of grip. The farmer felt the change through his hands like a message. Wait. Told. We can. He tightened his arms around the dog's chest, pressing the trembling body against the wall, and eased his heel back to a strip of rock with just enough bite. Good, he said to them both, dog and child. Good. Stay with me. We're going to be all right. The rope above was quiet now, pulled firm by a dozen hands that had learned the meaning of steady. The farmer, the dog, the cliff, the crowd, every part of the scene hung together in a shared stillness, made strong by a little girl's voice floating down the face of the valley like the gentlest kind of command. The rope line tightened with a soft chorus of effort, and the young farmer braced his boots on the slanted shelf. On my count, he called up, breath short. 3, 2, tik. The hands above answered without words. The rope rose an inch. The farmer hugged the shepherd's chest to his own and shifted his weight so the dog could slide with him. The cliff grumbled. Dust fell like gray rain. The dog's nails scraped, then found a small bit of grip. Good boy, the farmer murmured. Stay with me. The line of neighbors leaned back as one. Shoulders locked. Heels dug in. A low, steady pull. No jerks. No rush. The rope sang a rough note against the rock as it moved. The farmer matched their rhythm, inch by inch, one breath at a time. The little girl kept her place at the rim, her grandmother's hands around her waist, and sent her voice down again. Breathe, Xiao. You're brave. The shepherd's chest pressed against the farmer's forearm and began to follow her count. He wasn't fighting now. He was listening. Another foot, someone said, eyes on the knots. Nice and easy. The farmer lifted his chin and found the next finger hold. His gloves burned. His legs shook. But higher now, just a little. He could see the edge, the kind of safety you don't believe in until you touch it. The shepherd trembled harder from the climb, from fear, from too much time holding on. The farmer tightened his hold the way you do when a calf tries to bolt. Almost there, he told the dog and maybe himself. Hands reached over the rim, 2, 4, 6, and the world at the top leaned toward them. The farmer set his boot against a seam in the stone and gave the dog one last shove upward. Take his shoulders, he shouted. The first pair of hands cupped the shepherd's chest. Another pair guided his back. The dog scrabbled and slid, then with a raw, scraping sound he came up over the edge and into the arms waiting for him. Gasps turned into small cheers that broke quickly into quiet again when they saw him. The shepherd collapsed the second his paws hit flat ground. He didn't stand. He didn't even try. He folded onto his side, ribs showing like thin bars, sides moving too fast. His front pads were torn and raw. One paw bled steady in a thin trickle. His fur was full of dust and burrs. His eyes were open but heavy, the wild shine fading into a dull, aching glaze. He gave a soft, broken whine that sounded more like a sigh. Blanket, someone called. Water, but not too much. The crowd made room without thinking, stepping back a half pace so he wouldn't feel boxed in. People took off jackets. One woman knelt and set a folded coat under his head. The farmer came up last, boots shaking, face gray with dust. He untied the rope with clumsy fingers and sat back on his heels, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the dog like a man counting the beats of a miracle. Before anyone could stop her, the little girl broke free of her grandmother's hands and ran forward. Sweetheart, careful, the older woman started, but the child was already there, small knees sinking into the gravel beside the shepherd. She didn't grab. She didn't pat hard. She lowered herself to the ground and made a lap out of her little legs. then bowed her head over him the way a bird shields a chick from rain. The shepherd lifted his chin an inch as if to ask a question. The girl's answer was to rest her palm on the side of his face. "It's okay," she whispered. "I've got you." The dog exhaled like a door opening. He slid his muzzle into her lap and pressed his head there with his whole weight, as though the earth had finally given him a place to belong. His tail moved once, a tired little thump against the rocks. Something in the air changed. The grandmother covered her mouth with both hands. Tears filled her eyes and spilled over, clean and sudden. "He chose her," she said, voice breaking on the last word. The young farmer wiped his forehead with the back of his glove and smiled a shaky smile he couldn't hide. Around them, the circle of neighbors went still. The cliff, the ropes, the danger, all of it fell back a step in the face of that quiet picture. A small child and a big, broken dog finding each other like they had practiced this moment for years. A man brought a tin cup with an inch of water. "Let her give it," the farmer said softly. "He's looking to her." The girl took the cup in both hands, careful as if she held a bird egg. "Tiny sips," someone murmured. She tilted the rim, and the shepherd's tongue flicked once, twice. He licked her fingers by accident and then on purpose. The water was gone in 3 small sips. "Good boy," she breathed. "More later." A neighbor tore a strip from a clean cloth and wet it. "May I?" she asked the girl. The child looked at the shepherd's eyes as though asking him. He didn't lift his head, didn't move his paws, but his tail tapped that same soft answer. The woman dabbed gently at the blood on his pads, washing away grit and mud. The dog flinched once and then relaxed again when the girl's hand slid to his ear and stayed there, a steady point he could trust. "Any vets here?" someone asked. "I used to work for one," a man said. He crouched and checked the gums, the pulse at the neck, the belly for pain. "He's exhausted, dehydrated. Pads are torn, nothing deep. We need to keep him warm, give sips, get him home in quiet. No crowding. He's safe now." The words seemed to land on the dog like a blanket. The shepherd's eyes never left the little girl's face. People leaned in from time to time, and he watched them with a hum of alert fear, the kind that comes from too many hard days. Then the child whispered something only he could hear, and his eyes softened, and the fear slid off. It was in that switch, tight, then loose, then soft again, that the truth settled over the gathering like evening dew. He had held on because she asked him to. He had climbed because her voice told him he could. It wasn't the rope alone that saved him. It was the thread between the two of them, unseen but strong. They slid a blanket beneath him like a sling, planning a slow carry to the truck. When they lifted, he tried to stand. His back legs shook and failed, but his front paws worked anyway, searching, wanting. The girl stood and took a single step toward the truck. The dog, swaying, found his feet and took the same step. "Easy," the farmer said, steadying the blanket with both hands. "We'll go at your pace." The dog didn't look at him. He watched the child's shoes and followed them. At the tailgate, 2 men lowered the bed gently. They tucked coats into a nest and laid the shepherd down. He reached his head up, searching, and the girl climbed in beside him without waiting for permission. She sat cross-legged and let his head find her lap again. The grandmother climbed up on the bumper, wiped her cheeks, and laughed softly at herself through tears. "Look at me," she said to no one. "I'm a mess." The crowd smiled because they were too. The young farmer came to the side of the truck and rested his hands on the rail. His fingers were raw where the glove had rubbed through. "You did it," the grandmother told him. "You saved him." He shook his head. "We just pulled," he said, eyes on the child and the dog. "She saved him." The line of neighbors, dusty and tired, nodded without argument. They had all heard it. They had all felt the moment the fear eased because a small voice told it to. "Thank you," the girl said then, so quiet it might have been the wind. The farmer looked up, surprised, and then dropped his eyes quick, shy at the weight of it. "You're welcome," he said, and that was enough. The sun had slipped behind the ridge, leaving the valley in a soft blue. Crickets started up, brave again now that the shouting had stopped. Someone draped a blanket over the child's shoulders. Someone else set a bottle of water by the grandmother's feet. The rope lay in a tired heap, job done. The cliff stood where it always had, but it felt tamer somehow, not because it had changed, but because the people had, for the space of an hour they had pulled together like parts of one body. "Let's get him home," the grandmother said, voice steady again. Slow and quiet. The farmer climbed into the cab and started the truck. The neighbors stepped back, then back again, forming a lane. As the truck rolled forward, heads turned to follow it, but it was the sight in the bed that everyone carried home. A little girl with a German shepherd's heavy head in her lap, her hand moving in small circles on his ear, his eyes closing at last, safe. No one said it out loud, but they all knew. The dog had been pulled up by rope and hands and will kiss. But he had been pulled back to life by love you could measure in simple things. A voice counted out of a child's chest, a touch that asked nothing, a promise that felt true the second it was spoken. That was why he held on. That was why he made it. And that was why, when the grandmother whispered again, he chose her, not a single person disagreed. The old farmhouse smelled of warmth and soup when they carried the shepherd inside. The neighbors had gone home now, the evening quiet settling around them like a heavy blanket. The grandmother led the way, her lantern swinging gently, casting soft light over the wooden walls. The little girl walked close to the dog, her tiny hand brushing his fur every few steps as if she feared he might vanish without her touch. They laid him on a folded quilt near the fireplace. The shepherd sank into it with a sigh so deep it felt like the release of years. His eyes fluttered closed, but the child knelt by him instantly, whispering, "Not yet, boy. Stay with me." And his eyes opened again, tired but listening. The grandmother brought a bowl of warm broth, the smell rich with herbs. She dipped her spoon and offered it carefully. At first the shepherd only sniffed, wary and weak. But when the little girl held the bowl in her own small hands, the dog leaned forward, tongue lapping slowly, as though her touch had given permission. Each sip seemed to steady him, pulling life back into his body. After he had eaten, the grandmother fetched a basin of warm water and a soft towel. The girl helped, her tiny hands dipping into the water, wringing the cloth with effort, and gently stroking the shepherd's back. Dust and dried mud streaked the towel brown. "Poor thing," the grandmother murmured, brushing the tangled fur away from his neck. "What have you been through?" That was when they saw it. Beneath the matted hair, hidden in the shadows of his coat, lay a collar. Old, worn leather clung loosely around his neck, its edges frayed, the buckle rusted. The grandmother adjusted her glasses and leaned closer. "Wait, there's something here." She rubbed her thumb against the leather, clearing away grime. Slowly, faint letters appeared, initials, almost rubbed away by time. The girl tilted her head, squinting. "What does it say, Nana?" The grandmother traced the marks with her fingertip. "It looks like HW." The letters were crooked but clear enough once revealed. She sat back with a frown. "Strange. Who would have left you up there with this still on?" The shepherd shifted, pressing his head into the child's lap again, as if to remind them that he belonged to this moment, not just the past. But the collar's faint engraving lingered in the grandmother's mind, whispering a story she couldn't ignore. The next morning, they bundled him into the old pickup and drove into town. The vet's office smelled of antiseptic and hay, the mix of medicine and farm life. The vet, a kind man with silver hair and gentle eyes, examined the shepherd with quiet focus. He weighed him, checked his paws, pressed carefully against his ribs. "He's thin," the vet said softly. "Too thin. Malnourished for sure. Pads torn, but no broken bones. He'll recover with rest, food, and care. He's strong enough to survive." You pulled him back just in time. The grandmother exhaled, relief softening her shoulders. But she still held the collar in her hands, turning it over and over. "Doctor," she asked, "do you remember a story, years ago, maybe 5, maybe more? A man lost in the mountains around here. They said he had a shepherd with him." The vet paused, his face thoughtful. "Yes," he said slowly. "I remember. Henry Walker. Folks searched for weeks. They found his pack, but not him. They said his shepherd vanished too. Many thought the dog must have wandered off, or worse." He shook his head. "But no one ever found the animal." The grandmother looked down at the worn collar, her fingers pressing the faint initials. "H.W., she whispered. "Henry Walker." The child hugged the dog tighter, eyes wide. "He wasn't lost, Nana," she said softly. "He was waiting." The words carried such quiet certainty that even the vet paused, his hand resting on the shepherd's side. The little girl's voice trembled with the kind of truth only innocence could hold. "He was waiting for us." The shepherd lifted his head at her words, eyes shining with something almost human. His tail brushed against the floor, slow and sure. In that moment, the grandmother felt a chill, not from fear, but from the strange, gentle way the past and present seemed to meet. Perhaps this dog had once belonged to another, a hiker who never returned. Perhaps he had carried that loss for years. But now, looking at the way he leaned into her granddaughter's arms, the grandmother knew the truth. Whatever his story had been, it had led him here. The vet gave his final instructions: warm food, gentle walks, time to heal. But as they left, the grandmother found herself glancing back at the old collar in her hand. It was no longer just leather and metal. It was a key to a forgotten story, one that had waited in silence until a child's voice called it back to life. That night, as the farmhouse settled into quiet again, the little girl curled up beside the shepherd on the quilt. She stroked his ear until his breathing slowed, until sleep took him at last. Her whisper carried through the flickering firelight. "You weren't lost. You were waiting for me." And for the first time in years, perhaps since the day he'd last walked the mountain with his old master, the shepherd slept with peace in his heart. Word of the rescue spread faster than the morning sun. By noon the next day, neighbors were dropping by the farmhouse, not just to see the shepherd, but to share what they remembered. Old men with caps in their hands, women carrying pies or jars of soup, children peeking shyly from behind their mother's skirts. The living room filled with voices, soft at first, then heavier as pieces of the past began to return. "It was years ago," one man said, leaning on his cane. "Daniel Moore, you all remember him. Strong as an oak, always with his shepherd. Loyal animal, followed him everywhere. Folks said you couldn't tell where the man ended and the dog began." Another nodded, her eyes clouded with memory. "He went hiking up in the Blue Ridge one spring. Weather turned bad. They searched for days, weeks even. Never found him. Only his pack, left on the trail like he meant to come back." "And the dog?" the grandmother asked softly, her hand resting on the worn collar. The room fell quiet. Then a whisper from the corner: "The dog was never found." The girl, sitting cross-legged on the quilt beside the shepherd, stroked his ear as if she had known this story all along. The dog leaned into her touch, eyes closing, tail brushing gently against the floor. That evening, as the last visitors drifted home, a car pulled into the gravel drive. From it stepped a woman in her 40s, her eyes scanning the yard like she already knew what waited inside. The grandmother opened the door, and the woman barely crossed the threshold before her gaze fell on the shepherd. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled instantly. "Ranger," she gasped, stumbling forward. That's Ranger." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of the name. He lifted his head, uncertain, but did not rise. The little girl's arms tightened around him, as if afraid he might vanish if she let go. The woman knelt a few feet away, her face crumpling with grief and wonder. "I thought you were gone forever," she whispered. "When Dad disappeared, we searched for you both. When they never found you, I told myself maybe you'd followed him, maybe you were at peace together." She reached out a trembling hand, but stopped midway, her eyes darting to the child. The shepherd looked between them, torn, his tail twitching once, then still. The room held its breath. The grandmother placed a steadying hand on the woman's shoulder. "He's been through so much," she said gently. "My granddaughter found him. Or maybe he found her." The little girl looked up, her eyes wet but certain. "He was waiting for us," she whispered, echoing her words from the night before. "He wasn't lost. He was waiting." The woman pressed her lips together, a sob caught in her throat. She lowered her hand, letting it fall to her lap. For a long moment she simply watched. The child, the dog, the bond that needed no explanation. At last she spoke, her voice raw but clear. "He was my father's dog. His name was Ranger. But—" she looked at the shepherd again, then at the girl whose small hands stroked him with such tenderness. "If he chose you, this is his home now." The grandmother's eyes shone. The little girl buried her face into Ranger's neck, whispering words no one else could hear. The dog let out a long breath, a sound halfway between relief and surrender, and laid his head back into her lap. The woman wiped her tears but smiled through them. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving him what we couldn't, a second chance." That night, the town gathered again. Not out of duty this time, but out of something gentler. They brought casseroles, blankets, fresh hay for the barn. Children crowded close to Pet Ranger's back, though he only truly relaxed when the girl was near. The older folks watched, nodding, whispering to each other about miracles, about how sometimes life returns in ways no one expects. Soon, people stopped calling him Ranger or arguing over his past. They called him what the child had named him, Shadow. To them, he wasn't just a lost dog anymore. He was a symbol. A dog who had clung to the cliff's edge when all seemed hopeless, and a child whose voice had been enough to pull him back. By the week's end, the story had spread across town. How the little girl saved the shepherd, how the dog found a new home in her lap, how love had been stronger than fear. At the grocery store, neighbors spoke of it in hushed tones as if afraid to spoil the magic. At church, the pastor mentioned it in his sermon, reminding everyone that loyalty never fades, even across years. And when folks passed the farmhouse in the evenings, they sometimes slowed their steps just to see the light in the window, where a child and her dog sat side by side, shadows flickering on the curtain. The grandmother, watching all this, knew the truth. The town wasn't just healing the dog was healing them too, reminding them that some stories never end. They only wait for the right hands, the right heart, to continue. The days that followed brought a change so gentle, so steady, that the grandmother sometimes found herself standing still just to take it all in. The shepherd, Shadow, as the little girl called him, began to heal before her very eyes. At first, he ate slowly, his ribs showing through his thin frame. But with every meal of warm broth and scraps of meat, strength returned. His fur grew softer, shining again where it had once been dull and tangled. The scars on his paws faded, and the once trembling creature began to walk with the proud gait of a German shepherd once more. But the change wasn't his alone. The little girl changed too. Where once she had carried the quiet shadows of a child too young to know grief but old enough to feel it, laughter began to spill from her again. At breakfast, she giggled when Shadow nudged her hand for a piece of toast. In the yard, she ran barefoot through the grass, Shadow racing alongside her, his ears flying in the wind. The sound of her laughter, light and clear, filled the farmhouse like sunlight pushing out darkness. At night, Shadow never left her side. He lay curled against her bed, one ear always twitching at the smallest sound. Sometimes, when she stirred or whimpered in her sleep, he pressed his nose gently against her arm until she settled again. The grandmother noticed something remarkable too. The girl had always been forgetful about her medicine, but now Shadow would nudge her at the same time each evening, almost as if he knew. The little girl would laugh, scratching behind his ears as she swallowed her dose. "See, Nana," she said one night, her voice filled with pride. "He takes care of me too." Word of the bond between the child and the dog spread quickly, just as the story of the cliff had spread before. Neighbors began to stop by not only to check on Shadow's health but to witness what they called a living miracle. Farmers brought sacks of dog food, children brought hand-sewn blankets, and even the local pastor visited, kneeling beside Shadow to stroke his head and whisper a blessing. "This is more than just a rescue," he said, looking at the grandmother with gentle eyes. "This is healing, for both of them." The grandmother couldn't disagree. She saw it each day, in the sparkle that returned to her granddaughter's eyes and the weight that returned to Shadow's frame. They had found each other on the edge of danger, and now they were mending each other's broken pieces, thread by thread, day by day. It wasn't long before the town began to treat the pair as a symbol of something larger. At the market, whispers followed them, not of pity, but of admiration. "There they are," people said softly, watching the child walk proudly beside her dog. The girl who heard the cry. The dog who wouldn't let go. One warm afternoon, as the sun began to dip, the little girl tugged on Shadow's collar and pointed toward the hill behind the farmhouse. "Let's go back," she said. The grandmother hesitated, understanding instantly what she meant. The cliff. The place where fear had once gripped every heart. Still, she couldn't say no. Together, they climbed the familiar path. The grandmother walked slowly, but the girl pulled ahead, Shadow's strong body steady beside her, his tail swaying in calm rhythm. When they reached the top, the valley spread before them in golden light, the same cliff edge where a desperate cry had once echoed. The girl stood there for a long moment, the wind tugging at her hair, her hand resting firmly on Shadow's back. Her small chest rose and fell as she stared out across the drop. For a flicker of a second, her grandmother saw the shadow of fear in her eyes. But then the child straightened, her shoulders lifting with quiet courage. She turned to her grandmother, her voice soft but sure. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. Her hand moved to scratch behind Shadow's ears, her face glowing with a smile that was half joy, half strength. "He saved me too." The words carried across the ridge, gentle yet strong, and for the grandmother they were like a bell ringing, an ending to one chapter and the beginning of another. The cliff was no longer a place of fear, no longer a place where silence had reigned. It had become a place of memory, of triumph, of healing. Shadow barked once, sharp but happy, as though agreeing. His eyes turned to the child, shining with devotion. And in that moment, anyone who had once doubted, anyone who had once feared, would have seen the truth. This was not just a dog who had been rescued. This was a friend, a guardian, a piece of the child's heart made whole again. As the sun sank, painting the valley in shades of red and gold, the three of them stood together, the grandmother, the child, and the shepherd. The wind carried no cries this time, only peace. And for the first time, the grandmother whispered what she had been feeling all along. Sometimes, it takes two broken hearts to heal each other. The farmhouse kitchen smelled of tea leaves and fresh-baked bread. The evening sun poured through the curtains, soft and golden, painting the table in warm light. 3 women sat around it. The grandmother, her granddaughter perched on a chair too big for her, and Daniel's daughter, who had returned once again, not out of grief this time, but with a heart ready to share. At their feet lay the shepherd, Shadow, his chest rising and falling in a calm rhythm. The little girl dangled her feet, humming to herself as she stroked the dog's head. On the table lay a small box, wrapped neatly in brown paper and tied with string. The grandmother slid it forward and nodded to the girl. "Go ahead, sweetheart. This is for him." The child tugged the string and opened the box with eager fingers. Inside lay a shining silver tag, freshly engraved. The letters caught the light as she read them aloud in her soft, careful voice. "Shadow, forever home." Her eyes lit up as though she had just opened a box of treasure. She bent down and clipped the tag onto the shepherd's collar with her grandmother's help. The faint clink of metal echoed like a promise in the still kitchen. Shadow lifted his head at the sound and gave a slow, wagging thump of his tail. Daniel's daughter pressed a hand to her lips, her eyes shining with tears. "He has a family now," she whispered. "Not just a house, a family." The grandmother reached across the table, placing her hand gently over hers. "And in this home, he'll never be forgotten. Not for a day." For a moment, silence filled the room. Not heavy silence, but the kind that wraps itself around people when words fall short. The kind of silence born of understanding. Later, when teacups were emptied and dusk painted the world in purples and blues, the 3 of them moved out to the porch. From there, the cliff could be seen in the distance, its jagged edge now softened by the glow of memory. What was once a place of fear had become something else entirely. The little girl pointed toward it, her voice full of wonder. "That's where I heard him, Nana. That's where he called for me." Her grandmother nodded, her gaze following the line of the ridge. "And that's where love began. Sometimes places remember things better than we do." Daniel's daughter smiled through her tears. "My father always said that loyalty outlives even the strongest storm." Maybe he was right. Maybe this was meant to be. The little girl leaned against Shadow, pressing her cheek into his fur. "He wasn't lost," she said softly. "He was waiting for me." The grandmother felt her heart ache at the words. Children had a way of seeing truth so clear, so simple, that grown-ups often missed it. She looked at her granddaughter and then at the shepherd, and she knew, some bonds are written long before we find them. That night, the family created a new ritual. Instead of fearing the attic or the shadows of the valley, they made a space of memory. The grandmother carried up an old trunk of quilts and photo albums. Together, the girl and Daniel's daughter placed a framed picture of the shepherd on a shelf, alongside a photograph of Daniel himself. The little girl called it the memory corner. No longer was the attic or the cliff a place to fear. They had become markers of where the story began, where a cry had been answered, where love had won. The narrator's reflection carries softly here, as though speaking for every heart touched by the story. Sometimes the strongest rescues don't come from ropes or strong hands. Sometimes they come from innocence that refuses to let go. From a child's voice that believes what others cannot. From the simple truth that love is the only rope strong enough to pull someone back. In the weeks that followed, the town continued to visit, but the excitement slowly gave way to something more meaningful. Shadow was no longer a spectacle, no longer the dog from the cliff. He was simply Shadow, the little girl's guardian, the town's reminder of loyalty, and a living symbol of what happens when love refuses to quit. One evening, as summer waned, the grandmother took her rocking chair out onto the porch. The little girl sat on the steps with Shadow's head resting across her lap. The horizon stretched wide before them, painted in deep orange and soft rose. The child whispered as though speaking only to him, "We're safe now. You and me." Shadow gave a quiet, contented sigh. His eyes, once wild with fear on the ledge of the cliff, now closed in peace. His paws twitched lightly in a dream, his tail brushing against the porch as if even in sleep he kept close to her. The grandmother watched the two of them silhouetted against the fading light and felt tears rise in her eyes, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. They had walked through fear and come out with something stronger. Together, the camera of imagination pulls back here, letting the picture speak. A child and her shepherd, seated at the edge of the world, both watching the horizon. And with that, the story closes with a gentle call, meant not just for the family in the tale, but for anyone who has ever doubted the power of love. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes loyalty never fades.